Welcome to the Silver Divorce Podcast, where we offer stories, advice, and support for people age 50 plus who are considering or who are facing divorce. I'm Lisa.
And I am Pat.
So, Pat, before we get started, here we are in the beautiful Whitfield Studios podcasting room.
Yeah.
We are so fortunate to be able to podcast in the most advanced room I think I've ever been in. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our growth and share a big thank you to our listeners.
Yeah.
We actually launched, as you know, March 22nd, and I'm really pleased to say we're just a couple shy of 100 plays, which I'm told is pretty good for a brand new podcast.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody who has tuned in. Please share this podcast with people you know who could benefit from it. And we just are here to help people avoid the pitfalls that we fell into when we both went through the divorce process.
Exactly.
So, but before we get started, I'm going to have our disclaimer, as we always do, which is we are not attorneys and we are not counselors. We're just here to share our experiences and the knowledge that we've gained and help you avoid those pitfalls of the divorce process. And again, we are sharing true stories. These are stories from the trenches, but we know it's important to protect people's privacy.
Right.
So we're going to change the names, and you might hear us talk about Jack and Mary quite a bit. And and with that said, Pat, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we are going to talk about drawing boundaries and standing in your own power during separation and divorce.
Gosh, that is such a challenging thing to do when you're going through the emotional process of divorce. And but probably the most important thing that you can do to help you get through it. So, Pat, can you just share with us what is a personal boundary?
Well, a personal boundary, it's where you set the limits and the rules for yourselves within your relationships.
So you've been in this marriage perhaps 25, 30 years. Why now? Why is it important to start setting that boundary now?
Well, ideally, we put boundaries in place for our own well-being, and it helps with trust, safety, and it creates respect. And this gives one the ability to express their thoughts and feelings as it clears the way to communicate your needs. Setting boundaries will improve your mental health and mood and emotional well-being. And Lisa, there's an old saying that we teach people how to treat us.
Yeah, that's very true. And oftentimes, being treated disrespectfully starts in the marriage as the marriage is beginning to erode. And you may not even notice it over time that you're allowing somebody to disrespect you.
That's right.
So I know that there's a difference. There's physical boundaries, and we're going to be talking about emotional boundaries. But Pat, can you just share some examples of creating physical boundaries? What exactly does that mean? Do we put a fence around ourselves?
Well, no, not exactly. But, you need to create physical boundaries first. And by doing so early in the separation, it will make it less daunting. And, this will also help to manage expectations and then give you the mental space you will need to work through the situation yourself. And Lisa, can you speak to the legalities of possession of the marital home? This is a huge topic.
Oh, yeah, that's always a concern. People want to know, should I leave the marital home? And oftentimes a spouse will tell the other one, you have to leave. Well, my understanding is that in Tennessee, there is no legal requirement that either spouse stay in the house. So if you're worried about, I must stay in the house or I will lose something, there is no legal requirement for that. But for the sole purpose of creating a boundary, you may want to think about having one spouse move out of the house. And, this really comes into play when the living situation feels unsafe.
Right.
If you feel unsafe, then you will want to have that conversation about leaving the house, or you may just have to leave the house. In general, what we've learned is that unless the court specifically orders you to, or it is a safety issue, it is not recommended that you vacate the home until temporary orders are in place.
Exactly.
So again, as we always do, please talk to your attorney, because there are circumstances that you want to share with your attorney before you make that decision.
That's right. And so if you do agree to have one spouse move out, you must set and agree on a clear time frame when the one spouse will leave. And you'll also need to decide how to divide your belongings. And the same applies to money, bills, and there also will need to be a discussion on managing time with children if they're still at home. And it's also good to get some expert support to help you in setting boundaries during your separation.
That talking about money and bills is important, because sometimes people will leave and they won't have had that discussion about who's going to continue to pay for the utilities, who's going to continue to pay for the mortgage.
Exactly.
And there are joint accounts, and how are you all going to access that? If you are in a contested divorce and one person has filed, there will be an injunction issued that pretty much says you can't enter any long-term contracts, and you're pretty much told you must stay to ordinary routine expenses. But unless you two have had that conversation about how those bills are going to get paid, everybody is just in limbo. So try to have that conversation if one person is going to move out. How is the process of keeping the family going to work until there is a legal document in place? So also, our listeners might be wondering, speaking of legal documents, do you have to have a legal separation to do this? And what we've learned from our research is that Tennessee does not require spouses to separate before divorce unless a spouse files a no-fault divorce based on a 2-year separation. But, as we've said, many spouses do voluntarily separate before or during the divorce process. If you're listening to us and you live in another state besides Tennessee, we do encourage you to look up your state's divorce laws or speak to an attorney.
That's true, Lisa. And, I would not leave the marital home until you talk to your attorney, as Lisa mentioned. That one decision has many implications. And I would also like to mention, in my experience in facilitating divorce care, for almost 20 years, I have witnessed women in general, those who were in a relationship where the husband made all the decisions and were perhaps manipulated. These women were reluctant to push back and just let their husbands be in charge and mainly controlled by their spouses during the marriage. So this opened them up to being bullied and abused. Now they have a hard time taking a stand for themselves and are at a complete loss and in need of direction and help, especially if they were blindsided with a divorce unexpectedly.
Right, and that really is the most important time to get help is when, if you have been somewhat secondarily managing the finances and you're not quite sure where things stand.
Right.
You could also get blindsided in the divorce process if you don't have that knowledge.
Right.
So, there has been a lot of attention recently on the concept of echoist. We hear a lot about narcissist personalities, but there is a new, I shouldn't say new, but it's coming more to the forefront, a personality trait that causes people to put others' needs first and makes them susceptible to being taken advantage of by narcissists, and the term is called echoist. So, Pat, can you share a little bit more with us about what an echoist is?
Absolutely. Echoism is overshadowed by narcissism, which is a personality disorder. And some of the hallmarks of echoism are being afraid to be seen as a narcissist and you want to avoid the spotlight. Also, a feeling of being undeserved, selfish, or guilty. And an echoist has a tendency to put others' needs first, even if it causes them unhappiness. They just can't say no. And they also reject praise and compliments and oftentimes suffer from low self-esteem and depression. And, they tend to attract narcissists and have trouble setting personal boundaries.
Yeah, in some respects, they look at that person who's the narcissist
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to be like them. And so they become the opposite.
Complete opposite, yeah.
And also with that, when they've been with a narcissist for a long time, they don't really value themselves as they should.
I know.
And that's why they are willing to put other people's needs first. And, truthfully, I see myself in some of those traits.
Mm-hmm.
I have problems saying no, and I can be that person who wants to be a people pleaser.
Yeah.
When I was working, I had a motto, and it was find a way to get to yes. And find a way to get to yes meant that, I would work with that other person's needs and see how we could meet those needs. And oftentimes it was at the sacrifice of my own self. It meant I might have been at the office for 10, 12 hours a day. And if I had something scheduled that I wanted to do on my time and somebody got in touch with me and said, we really need you to come to this meeting, I would say, okay, I'll be there. And I would completely forget about what it was that I had planned to do.
Yeah.
So it really is somebody who is self-sacrificing in a way that's detrimental to their own health.
Yes.
To make those narcissists happy.
Yes.
So it really is a turning point when you begin to value yourself and how your life could be improved with setting those firm boundaries. So it starts with communicating how you want to be treated by others.
Exactly.
And almost demanding respect.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be done. It is okay to say, I'm sorry I can't do that. I have something else planned already, but I'm happy to do it another time.
Yeah.
That's just a different way of getting to yes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to flex those muscles about handling those boundaries, you'll start to respect yourself more, because if you don't respect yourself, you can't expect anybody to respect you.
Oh, yeah.
So it's an intentional act, and you have to not worry about how the other person is going to handle the boundary you set.
Yeah, excuse me, that's right. You're going to have to get a lock on your emotions, and one must learn to tolerate the emotions that may come up with the other person when you set those boundaries. And you need to also have tolerance on your own emotions as well, especially if it makes you uncomfortable. And, it takes practice to work through this journey and prepare yourself mentally to set those boundaries. And you've got to plan ahead on how you will handle the situation and what you'll do if the other party makes you anxious or uncomfortable. And just know you can walk away and table the discussion for another time and give yourself permission to say, no, not now. You can be civil but direct. And this is where you stay in your power and control and set boundaries. And Lisa, how did you go through self-care? What did you do to take care of yourself?
Oh, sure. Before I talk about that, I want to touch on what you said about, flexing. It's not natural.
No.
It's not natural for echoists to flex their muscles and to start to set some boundaries. And so it isn't as though you have to completely turn your life upside down and become somebody that you weren't, but start in small steps.
Right.
Start, and I can share with you an example of a small step that I started.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky in that I have 3 grandchildren, wonderful grandchildren. And one of mine lives in Atlanta and the other 2 are here. And they're at my house frequently. And I was starting to get contacted by the ex to make arrangements to pick up and see those grandchildren. Well, the other people in our family, extended family members, when they wanted to see those grandchildren, they would make arrangements with the mothers, not directly with me. And I thought, why am I putting myself through any more anxiety or putting myself in a situation that makes me uncomfortable?
Exactly.
If I don't have to, because the reality is that person is not my family anymore. That person should be just like everybody else. If he wanted to make arrangements to see the grandchildren, then he needs to do it with their mothers.
Right.
So I took myself completely out and I communicated clearly. This is how it's handled with other family members. If you want to pick up, drop off, spend time with those grandchildren while they're in my care, please make arrangements with their mother. I am not comfortable being in the middle. And then I told my girls very clearly, I will not be the pickup point, the drop-off point. I will not be the communicator, the arranger. You will make those arrangements directly with him. So just taking myself out of that one situation and setting that one boundary, it left me feeling a little more at peace. I didn't have to have the anxiety of being in the middle of
drama.
Yeah, no drama. I didn't have to be under the anxiety of, me making the decision if those kids should go with somebody to do certain things, because that's not where I belong.
And that's a healthy boundary, Lisa.
Yeah, it really is. And so, I recommend that you pick something where you're extremely uncomfortable like that.
Right.
That you can set a boundary on to give yourself a little bit of grace and peace. And that's starting that process of flexing your muscle to create a boundary. And then, my girls they know it. They're comfortable with it. They understand it.
And this is where you weren't concerned about anybody's emotions, theirs or yours.
Right. That's right. And, I didn't have to care how that person felt about it because truthfully, he's just somebody I used to know, and shouldn't be treated any differently than any other extended family member who wants to spend time with those kids.
And it's for your own well-being.
Yeah. So, if you don't feel as though you can make a massive change, pick that one area.
Yeah.
What is the one thing you can do that you can flex a boundary to start bringing some peace into your life?
Yeah, just a good point. Just start taking the small steps and slowly build up. You don't have to take over everything all at once and
That's right,
and
Pat.
feel overwhelmed about setting boundaries.
Right, because you have enough emotions going through the divorce. You don't want to overwhelm yourself with trying to be somebody that you haven't been before.
Right.
But divorce is unbelievably traumatic, especially now we're all talking about silver divorce, where people have been married for decades.
Right.
And there are things that I did to help manage that stress. In addition to going through 2 cycles of divorce care, I relied on my daily Bible readings. I journaled to get my thoughts on paper. Journaling helps stop ruminating. Ruminating is where you just relive those stories in your head.
Yeah.
You replay those arguments over and over again. So I journaled and got those thoughts on paper. I spent a lot of time in my workshop. I refinished furniture. I spent a lot of time down there because that's my happy place. I, do something that you love.
Right.
Then I volunteered at the hospital. There's nothing that will take your worries away faster than helping people who
Absolutely.
are really having a medical crisis. So, I also want to mention there are good life coaches and counselors. Many insurance providers will pay for a set number of counseling sessions. And I was having a conversation recently with my daughter who works for the Darden Group. And you might know the Darden Group owns Olive Garden and Ruth Chris and Tommy Bahama and Capitol Grill, a lot of restaurants. They offer 8 counseling sessions for every issue that you have.
Wow.
So contact your insurance provider. You may have counseling sessions they'll pay for that you're not aware of.
That's excellent information.
Yeah, it will help. And then also, due to the overwhelming stress, and I had a physical impact going through that divorce. I did go to counseling sessions at Erlanger Behavioral Health, and Medicare paid for a set number of those.
Wow.
And then I continued with private counseling after the Medicare benefits were exhausted. And, I know you're out there listening thinking, wow, she was a hot mess. And it's true. I was a hot mess. I'll admit it.
You're going through the trauma of divorce. I mean, anybody going through that's going to be a hot mess, Lisa.
Yeah. But thanks to being, very deliberate about seeking help,
yes,
you will get through it in a much better way. I won't say easier, but your peace of mind will be at a more stable level. Mm-hmm. Your mental health will be at a more stable level. So I highly recommend that. And I know, Pat, you've been a divorce care facilitator for a long time, so maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, and that's the good news. I mean, Lisa, you just gave us some excellent information on some direction and getting help. And the good news is, you don't have to do this alone. There's divorce care. It's a great way to get help and support for yourself. And if you're not familiar with divorce care, it is a 13-week program with video instruction and class discussion on topics ranging from managing anger to handling issues with children, financial issues, and how to move on after divorce. It's a low-cost option, and it's supported by the local churches, and they offer scholarships to help pay for the cost of the workbook. And, I have witnessed women and men who started in divorce care class who were just completely broken, and with time and support during the class, they got back on their feet and began to stand in their own power and get their identity back. They developed the courage to set those boundaries and to become wiser and stronger people, and the outcome of their divorce was much better than they expected. Lisa, I recall several men who came through divorce care, and initially they were just totally broken and overcome with emotions. And as we neared the end of the 13-week cycle, I could just see a huge difference in them as they began to heal and got a firm foundation to draw from that helped them to manage their relationships with their ex-spouse and children. And they also expressed a newfound confidence in getting their power back. And, it takes time and it takes work to heal and get better. And it's a process to work through the changes that you need to practice self-awareness and take the first step to learn to say no and boost your self-esteem and value your own opinion. Seek support and prioritize your well-being. And know that self-blame is an action. It's not a feeling.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And as I mentioned, I went through divorce care twice. Each time I went through it, there are different things that you pick up and that you use, because going through the first time, you might not be ready to hear or act on, the module.
A lot of people are just in shock.
Right. And then you go through it the second time and you're in a different phase of the divorce
different
process.
Place.
And you get more value from it.
Yes.
So, Pat, in our third episode, we spoke with Holly Holloway, a life coach, and she talked about the issue of identity crisis that can come with divorce. So I'm just going to remind our listeners, if you haven't listened to episode 3, I highly encourage you to do so.
Yeah.
Holly has some great ideas on helping to manage through that identity crisis. So, Pat, with that being said, we talked about setting physical boundaries, but how do you go about protecting yourselves emotionally and setting appropriate boundaries to protect your mental well-being?
Well, Lisa, I'm glad you asked that. Deciding to set boundaries is the easy part. Being strong to enforce the boundaries, it's going to take courage and wisdom. And most importantly, if there are domestic violence issues, you need to seek an order of protection immediately, and so that you can safely remain in the home for your safety and well-being, and children if they're still at home. And you need to also lock down and do not use all your social media. This can significantly impact the divorce and will be used against you with Facebook posts, texting, all of it. And change all your passwords and PINs with all your social media, your financial, credit card, and other accounts immediately.
Yeah, I'd like to just interject that I'm told judges really frown on it when people start spouse bashing during a divorce process and try to tell their story.
Yeah, they don't like that at all. And, to protect your mental well-being, what you'll need to do is communicate your boundaries clearly and with no apology, and decide ahead of time what you are comfortable sharing with others. With long-term marriages, when they split, people are very curious, and they'll ask very personal questions. And so what you'll need to do is create a script or a pat answer based on what you're comfortable sharing. So when people ask questions, you can keep it simple and straightforward. And, you don't need to share your situation or owe anyone an explanation about your personal issues in life. So think ahead and be prepared and plan.
Yeah, that is one important thing, is that when you are first served with divorce papers, you're not ready to tell everybody anything.
Oh, no.
So your script can be very simple. It can be, I'm going through a divorce process. I'm really not emotionally ready to talk about it, but please pray for me.
Exactly.
And over time, as you get through the process, your script might change. You might offer a little bit more. But you never have to tell the dirt. You never have to feel as though people need to hear everything.
No.
And that's okay. You can continue to be a private person as you're going through the divorce process.
Right. And, another thing is you can be very clear with your spouse or soon-to-be spouse about how and when you want to communicate. And just know it's okay to ignore constant text messaging. And, if you do not have minor children, block that person. You don't need the drama and the craziness that goes on.
Yeah, and sometimes spouses will post things just to upset their soon-to-be ex. And I know the first thing I did immediately after being served with divorce papers, I went and I blocked and unfriended all of not only my soon-to-be ex, but all of his friends.
Yep.
Because I didn't need to see what he was doing. You don't need to see if that soon-to-be ex is out to lunch with somebody or out at the beach or having a good time, because you're thinking, I'm miserable. How is it this person has moved on? You don't need to see that. Save yourself the mental anxiety.
Yes.
Go ahead and unfriend those people and block them so that they can't see what you're posting. It's just a way to protect your mental well-being.
Right. And, I know you'll be curious, but just know that you don't need that. You got to think of yourself and your well-being.
That's right. So, we've shared a lot of strategies, but would you recommend that you put it in writing? I'm a planner. I believe that if you put it on paper, you can take the emotion out of it.
Right.
And the one successful way to go through a divorce is to take the emotion out of it and think of it as a business deal, because what you'll have left at the end in terms of money and in terms of maybe your house or maybe your vehicle is all you'll have that's left at the end. So you have to think about those more than you are thinking about the emotional aspect of the divorce, and that's really hard. So can you explain that a little bit, Pat?
Yeah. You have to look at it like a business, and like you said, Lisa, put the emotions aside. And, boundary setting is a process, and we highly recommend you journal and write it down. And a good thing to do first is identify the problem or frustration that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And it can't just be my ex.
No, there's so many others. And, decide beforehand on your wants or your limits, and communicate and express your desires either by email, message, or letter, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I sent emails.
Yeah.
Is what I did. And then I would handwrite some notes when I needed to. But just by that simple process of communicating via an email or letter, you're going to take away the opportunity for an emotional outburst.
Yes. And, once you do all that, enforce it and act on it. And this is the most challenging part. Express your wishes. Express your wishes. I can't speak today. Set the boundary and state the consequences to that. And most important, follow through. I know that if you don't enforce your boundaries, you know what you're doing? You're sending a message to your spouse that you can be manipulated. And remember, they're not used to you being firm in what you want. The dynamics have changed.
And it won't feel right to you either initially. Yeah. It'll feel like it's not you.
Right.
But as you continue on and do this more frequently, you'll have muscle memory, and it will start to feel more normal, and you'll start to feel more powerful.
It'll give you confidence. And when you're establishing those boundaries, let them know if they become angry, you will discontinue the conversation and table it for later when things calm down. This is one example of standing in your power and puts you in control and sets your limits on what you will tolerate.
That's right. That, the best part of divorce is you no longer have to put up with any crap from that person.
That's right. And, while the idea of setting boundaries may seem difficult and overwhelming, it's important to view it as a form of protection. You can look at it as like installing a security system. Once you do set and maintain your boundaries, you're going to have more peace and calm and less drama.
That is true. And Pat, if you've been used to going along to get along with this person you've been married to for decades,
right,
how do you know you need to set those boundaries?
Yeah, well, Lisa, here are some indicators that one may have poor boundaries without realizing it. And one of them is failing to speak up when treated poorly or being berated and criticized. And another is giving away too much of your time and energy and prioritizing others' needs over your own. And agreeing and going along with others when you actually disagree, especially to avoid conflict and try to maintain harmony. And saying yes to others when you really want to say no. And also engaging in toxic relationships with one-sided giving and taking. And another is tolerating passive-aggressive behavior and manipulative behavior tendencies by others to regain a sense of power, and experiencing chronic fear and concern about others' opinion of you.
Pat, you mentioned that chronic tolerating passive-aggressive behavior and manipulative behavior tendencies. As you start to stand in your power and set some boundaries, that person may engage in more aggressive, manipulative behaviors.
Right.
That's when you know that you are setting the right boundary.
That's right.
When they're flexing hard against it and trying to manipulate you even more, you're on the right path. You're starting to set the right boundary.
That's right. And if you identify with 3 or more of these statements, it's more than likely that you may struggle with boundaries.
It sounds a lot like echoism that we talked about earlier. Echoism and these notes are very similar. So, as I mentioned before, I recognize myself in some of those statements.
Yeah, me too.
And, if I do see myself, as you said, in 3 or more of those statements, what are some of the things that I should be thinking about?
Well, I would ask you all to consider, grant yourself permission to say no when it aligns with your true desires or needs. And you can express it assertively but kindly. And refuse to take blame. Know that someone else's anger and blame are not your responsibility.
Yeah, there are those people, I call them blame throwers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That they never accept responsibility for anything that they've ever done.
Yeah.
They find a way to throw the blame onto you.
Yep.
And somebody who might be in that echoism category will accept the blame,
Right.
even when it really isn't appropriate. So,
Yeah. And you know what? Expect respect. If someone treats you disrespectfully, remove yourself from the situation.
yeah, it's also a good time to assess your friendships.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I found is not everybody's there to be your supportive friend.
Right.
You'll have those people when you're going through a tough time who want the dirt. And, they're suddenly your best friend simply because they want to get the deets. And those friendships you might need to let go by the wayside, or you might need to pause. And you'll know that if you have a friend that constantly wants to make you relive your trauma,
Oh, yeah.
they are not your friend. If they are constantly calling you saying, I saw your ex with this person at this place, they are not your friend. They are contributing to your trauma and your stress. So evaluate those friend lists. And some of them you just need to pause for a while and put at arm's length.
That's right, Lisa. It's like it's constant rumination. You just don't need that. And you know what? Take time to understand and validate your own emotions, and don't let others invalidate how you feel.
That also goes for your adult kids. If you're getting divorced after 25, 30 years of marriage, you probably do have some kids who are adults, and they may have their own take on what happened.
Right.
And when you are expressing something, they may invalidate that. Well, that goes for them. Don't let them invalidate how you feel. It is how you feel, and you're entitled to that.
Right. And, they don't know all the ins and outs of your
right.
marriage. They don't know what you've been dealing with, all the details.
No.
And, also communicating effectively and assertively can be challenging during separation and divorce, especially if you have always let your spouse take the lead and have pacified them to get along. You have got to make it known that certain behaviors or actions are not acceptable.
That's right. And as we said, the more you flex, the more comfortable you will be.
Exactly.
And it's not easy, but it gets easier with each time that you set that firm boundary and you give yourself the mental space and a little bit more peace in your life.
And I know it can be scary, but make your mind up to start setting boundaries. Like Lisa said, take the small steps. And like she's mentioned, start flexing. And the more you do it and get confident, the better you'll feel and you'll be more in control.
That's right. So it's hard to change those behaviors when you've been in a relationship for decades.
Right.
It'll also be hard for that person to accept.
I know.
You've changed those behaviors, but during this time of emotional upheaval, now's the time. So the more intentional you are about boundary setting, the better able you will be to focus on the business side of divorce.
Right.
So this is the extremely important time to protect yourself. So that's a lot of information to process, Pat. But very important to take those deliberate steps to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
So, and if you can just start to follow some of the suggestions we offer, it will take the stress and anxiety away and allow you to heal, as Pat mentioned. So if you would like to join us for the next episode. We welcome your questions. Please email us at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com or join our Facebook page at Silver Divorce Podcast. We'd love to hear your questions and have you join the conversation. We'd like to hear from you. What do you want us to talk about?
Yeah,
we're now out booking guests. What guests would you like to hear from on the Silver Divorce Podcast? And we ask, if you are listening on Apple, please leave us a review and a rating. They're very important to grow this podcast. It helps us to move up in the algorithm. So whether you are considering divorce or are newly in the divorce process, we'll help you navigate and tell you things your attorney might not tell you.
Right.
Until next time, remember, divorce is an event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Pat. And hey, learn to stand in your power and set those boundaries.